Well, good morning, Southern Oregon. Welcome to the Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lema. I'll be your host today. I'm a broker here in beautiful Southern Oregon with John L. Scott Real Estate. And we're so excited to welcome Tia Politi to the show today. She's going to be doing a really interesting interview for us of all things landlord, tenant, and investing. And even if you're not a landlord or a tenant or an investor, you should listen to this interview because all the stuff that goes on in that world affects our general housing market here in Southern Oregon, and it affects our community. Besides, next week is Thanksgiving. You're going to be sitting around breaking bread with your friends and family. And wouldn't it be nice to know if you had the facts? Tia Politi is the president of the Oregon Rental Housing Association. She operates 5 landlord tenant hotlines, helplines. But I just call her the walking, talking encyclopedia. That's my nickname for her. Plus, she's really funny and she's very data oriented, very matter of fact. It's going to be a great interview. So please stay tuned to that. So one of the things we're going to talk to Tia Politi about is all these listings that are coming on the market. A lot of them are tenant occupied. And yes, it's so fabulous. I don't know if you noticed, we had such a good week for listings. So many more listings are coming on the market. And this is what we've been waiting for. And this is what we've been predicting. The backlog of sellers are finally getting into the market. In fact, they're getting in during the fall and winter, which is a little bit unusual for us here in Southern Oregon, isn't it? Right? We're a little bit seasonal in our housing market here in Southern Oregon. And there's so many listings coming on the market now. It feels almost like the beginning of spring, but that's fine. We'll take it. We're fine. I know people that will sell their house in the winter. They will buy a house in the winter. It's all fine. In fact, it can be just the best time ever to buy and sell. And if you do write an offer on a property that has a tenant, you might actually get a little bit better deal if you're willing to wait the 90 days that they need to find another place and move out, because not everybody can or wants to do that. So buyers, keep that in mind. This is something of an opportunity if it's a tenant occupied house. And if you're selling and you have a tenant, then just brush up on the rules. Listen to what Tia Politi has to say. We're going to talk about the guest policy updates from the state of Oregon. We're going to talk about if you're remodeling a tenant occupied place. We're going to talk about the rent prices in general because they're outpacing some of the income of our tenant population. Anyway, it's going to be a great show. We'll be back just a quick moment after a word from our sponsors. Do not touch that dial. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, folks. Alice Lema here, broker John L. Scott here in Southern Oregon. I'm your host for today. And we have one of my favorite people in the whole world. We have Tia Politi, who is going to talk to us about some of the landlord tenant changes that she's been dealing with in the last few months. Tia is the president of Oregon Rental Housing Association. She's the president of the Rental Owners Association of Lane County. She's got a great company. I think she's got property management creds. And Tia, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your credentials, and then let's talk about what's going on in landlord tenant land.
Oh, a lot's going on, Alice. Thank you so much for having me. In addition to, the leading the organizations you mentioned, I also own and operate Rental Housing Support Services, LLC. I provide education to landlords and tenants. I do evictions for hire, and I staff 5 landlord helplines around the state, providing
5 of them
information to landlords. I also provide consultation and mediation services as well. So thanks so much for having me today. Yes, there is a lot going on in the world of landlording. Just when we seem to think that our pain has an end date,
or they can't do anymore.
They come up with more. The date keeps getting pushed back. I mean, at this time, we have a final end date. The grace period that we're currently under Senate Bill 282 expires supposedly February 28th of 2022. However, as you may be aware, the short legislative session will be coming up and it ends the end of February as well. So we're expecting that the tenant advocates are, plotting more fun stuff for us in this short session. Now, there's not a lot of time they have to focus on this. So we're not really clear yet on what it is they're looking at, but we'll know soon. Currently, right now, what we're struggling with is part of the outcome of Senate Bill 278 required landlords to, if they're going to serve a notice for non-payment of rent that accrued from July 2021 moving forward, that they're required to serve a 10-day notice for non-payment instead of a 72-hour notice. And that along with that notice, they must serve a special form called an important notice about your rights to protection from eviction. That form informs the tenant that if they go and apply for rental assistance, that they're entitled to a 60-day safe harbor period, during which time they're protected from eviction. Or any termination for non-payment of anything, whether it's rent or damages or late fees or anything. Nobody asked me. I wish they had. If they had, I would have said 60 days. Are you kidding me? You think the government can process tens of thousands of applications and distribute funds within 60 days? Who thought that data? I would have said, if someone had asked me, maybe 120, maybe double that.
Yeah.
Now, in order to protect renters, some counties, Washington County, Multnomah County, and Lane County is looking at the same thing. I think the city of Beaverton has also done this, where they're implementing an additional 30-day extension. Now, the good part for housing providers regarding this bill was that at the end of the 60-day period, if you haven't been paid, that you can apply to the state to be reimbursed for that 60 days of rent. And so with this 30-day extension happening in certain areas, the landlord's not compensated for that extra 30 days. Again, it goes back to our feeling potentially that we could be looking at more illegal taking under the US Constitution. However, many renters are qualifying. Really, they can earn up to 80% of the area median and qualify for full rent assistance. And so part of the issue we had leading up to this was, come on, you got to make renters do something here, not just, say they can sign a form or whatever. And so we're seeing vast numbers of renters finally starting to apply. They have to, or they're going to get evicted. And so that's been super encouraging. And when I talk to property owners on the helpline, they're telling me, hey, the 60 days is up, what can I do? And I'm like, well, technically you could serve a new non-payment of rent notice and take it to court. The Chief Justice in Oregon has extended first appearances for non-payment by 3 weeks. So that's giving more time. And then if the tenant doesn't come up with the money, they're automatically scheduling trials for a month out, hoping to buy more time for the money to come through. Now, the latest we've heard is pretty distressing, and that is pretty much all the money has been accounted for. And
so
no,
already?
Yes, they're going to stop accepting applications as of December 1st. So how is this going to shake out? Well, what we're hearing is that, the governor's been hearing from tenant advocates going, we need more time. Oregon Housing and Community Services is saying we need more time. And I'd be, personally agreeable to more time if they would also extend the reimbursement period during which the landlord can be.
Yeah, that would only be fair for sure.
Right. And so the governor issued a really what I thought was a good statement. It was a few weeks back, where she said she was basically counting on the self-interest of landlords to be patient, right? And that's what I've been telling people. Do you think your tenant will qualify? And many of them go, yeah, my tenant lost his job. I think he's going to qualify. And I'm like, well, you may want to hang on and wait and see what happens. Because if the tenant does qualify, I'm hearing wonderful stories about, landlords getting all their back rent, current rent, plus 3 months moving forward. They're getting late fees, they're getting court costs, they're getting reimbursed for everything. One of my clients got a check for almost $30,000. Her tenant had not paid rent since April 1st of 2020.
Wow.
And he got rent assistance. I mean, when it works really well. And it's really helping housing providers, and it's helping renters in need. So the program is good. It's just the time frame that's not. How we deal with that, we'll see. There's actually, if your readership is interested, there is a meeting today at 2:30 that they can listen in on, where tenant advocates, and they're actually going to let a landlord speak. Not me, but Deborah Imsey from Multifamily Northwest will be speaking at that. And what I'm hearing from our legislative director in Aura and our lobbyist is that there's some opposition to a special session. We'll see. Right, politics is what it is, and pressure is being applied judiciously wherever it's being applied. And right now, I'm hearing the Republicans are opposed, and even Speaker Courtney or excuse me, he's the chair of the Senate. He might be opposed to it, but things change overnight. So I'm expecting that it will probably happen, and that it will probably extend the safe harbor period. What I'm all hoping is if they force that on us, they're also going to extend the reimbursement period. So we'll
yeah,
see.
that's an interesting debate. I can't see why they would argue that. If you're going to extend the tenants assistance, you absolutely should
Right.
extend the landlords. But like you said,
I'm
hard to guess.
Right. And I'm more concerned right now about that the state's run out of money, and they're going to stop accepting applications as of December 1. So for all of you housing providers out there, and if there's any renters listening in, go apply now before that deadline. But what's going to happen when there's no money, and yet this law remains in effect through February 28th of 2022? I don't know the answer to that. I think
Yeah, because they'll have to go get more funding, won't they, from somewhere?
Right. And I think they're pleading with the federal government for more money, but there's only so much money that you can print.
Well, I don't know. I've been surprised lately.
I know.
Who would have thought those little printers
and
were running?
We have inflation. Who would have thought that?
Well, yeah. So, we've got a lot to talk about, and inflation does play into Oregon rent fees. And then you have the shortage of housing because are you hearing a lot of landlords leaving the business? I know as an agent, I just have them lined up around the block trying to get ready to sell their properties.
Almost every day I'm hearing about owners going, I'm done in Oregon. They're selling their single family homes. And there was a really great article that the Rental Housing Journal published a month or two ago from a manager who had really good data to show here's the reduction in single family homes based on these restrictions that are driving landlords out of the Oregon market. What I'm hearing is that they're selling their Oregon properties, and if they are going to buy a rental somewhere else, they're going to Idaho, Arizona, Texas, and Florida, which are much more landlord friendly.
That is exactly right. That is exactly what the individual landlords are telling me. I'm 1031ing my stuff. I'm going to buy here, or they're just dissolving their portfolio and going. I mean, one guy said he was going into Bitcoin, and we're not investment advisors, so I won't comment on that. But everybody else is either cashing out, like you said, or going somewhere else. So yeah, I just, my heart aches for our tenant population. I don't know what's going to happen, but this last session, one of the situations that came up lately with some of our landlords here in Southern Oregon was the new guest policy. And people don't understand that there even was a change in the guest policy. Can you maybe bring people up to speed on that?
Sure. And this is, I'll remind your listenership that this is really where belonging to a landlord association is essential. So you're down in the Medford area, correct?
Yeah, Medford, Ashland, Grants Pass, Klamath.
Okay, so you've got an organization called the Southern Oregon Rental Owners Association, and if you're a member of that association, when Oregon Rental Housing Association blasts out this very important information that you need to know, it's going to go to you. Yeah, I don't think a housing provider cannot operate without belonging to an association.
Yeah, our local organization is amazing. They really are.
Right. So what we're dealing with right now is a new type of occupant of a property called a non-tenant guest. And, due to the pandemic, due to the Labor Day wildfires that basically, made 40,000 people instantly homeless, I see the need for this. So through February 28th of 2022, if a non-tenant guest stays in the unit beyond 15 days, in a calendar year, the landlord can require that non-tenant guest to satisfy the screening criteria they would ordinarily consider, except for credit and income. And if the person meets that criteria, which usually involves a criminal history screening, then the landlord is obligated to sign a temporary occupancy agreement with the tenant and the non-tenant guest, and that agreement cannot expire prior to February 28th. So if you want me to talk about temporary occupancies, I can do that.
Wait, let's go back just a little bit, because that was a mouthful. So most people's contracts with their landlords have like a 5 or 7 day guess. And so the state of Oregon overruled
correct
the person to person agreement.
Right.
Is that
so
legal?
Well, it was done by lawmakers, so they made it legal.
They made it legal.
Yeah, it's a bill. You read it. It's Senate
okay,
Bill
but so day 15, you have a guest. For 15 days, you don't know who they are. They're not paying any extra rent.
No, and by the way, you cannot charge extra rent for an extra occupant. So don't try to do that.
All
It's not
right.
legal.
And then, so then you have to do what forms?
We have a temporary occupancy agreement, and basically a temporary occupant is not a tenant. They don't have the rights of a tenant, and it's a way for the tenant to sort of retain control over the tenancy, because the tenant can ask the temporary occupant to move out at any time for any reason.
Oh,
with
I see.
basically immediate notice. The landlord can terminate a temporary occupant's right to be there if the temporary occupant violates the rental agreement. They smoke where they're not supposed to or whatever. And so it's important that landlords understand how the temporary occupancy statute works. It's 90.275. So you should look that up. Oregon Revised Statutes, Chapter 90 is what deals with landlord tenant law. And the temporary occupant section is actually one of the easier to understand and more readable sections of landlord tenant law. So that can help you and your renter wrap their minds around, what this means.
Well, maybe we'll start talking to the tenants during their application process about this so everybody understands. My goodness, our little state of Oregon. Okay, Tia Politi, we've got a break coming up. We'll be right back. Do not touch that dial. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, folks. I'm here with Tia Politi of the Southern Oregon Rental Housing Association. I'm sorry, not the Southern Oregon Rental Housing Association. That's the landlord club I keep talking about with my clients. You're the president of Oregon Rental Housing Association, and full of information and updates about all the things that have changed in the landlord tenant law. And even if you don't own property as a landlord, you want to know this information because you're probably going to have Thanksgiving with somebody who either is a tenant or a landlord, and you want to help them out and know the facts. Right, Tia?
That's a great suggestion.
So
Yes.
right before the break, we were talking about the guest policy, which got completely overwritten by the state of Oregon, so that now we have 15 days of guestum. Well, you called it temporary. What did you call it?
The statutory language calls these folks non-tenant guests.
Non-tenant guests.
Right.
Okay.
And basically requires a landlord to consider adding a non-tenant guest who stays beyond 15 days in a calendar year to be added to the rental agreement under a temporary occupancy agreement if the non-tenant guest meets the landlord's screening criteria in regards to criminal history and conduct. So, if your renter has a non-tenant guest and you serve them a notice and go, hey, you've had this person too long, it's time for you to, you need to either have them go, or they need to apply and either be added to the rental agreement as a tenant or be added as a temporary occupant. Then at that point, you get that application and you screen that person. And if that person has, violent criminal history, bad drug history, you don't have to allow it.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Except, one of the biggest challenges we have, of course, is proving that there are unauthorized occupants in a unit. It is notoriously one of the most challenging things to prove.
Why would that be hard?
Well, are you there all the time watching to see if that person's staying a substantial amount of time?
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Most of the landlords have outdoor cameras now for security.
Yeah. And so that can be a super good way, or, in multiplexes, it's definitely easier to keep track of things like that.
Gotcha.
At every complex, you have that nosy Nelly, that person they sort of assign themselves as your unofficial on-site manager if you don't have one. And they're great because they're the ones who tell you, hey, the common area lighting's burned out, or there's been this car leaking oil or whatever. And so they're usually the ones who will tell you what's really going on at a complex. And that's great. You want to foster those relationships, and cameras are very helpful. But typically, I rent single family homes. Now, all of mine are close to me, so I can kind of keep an eye on things. But a lot of housing providers don't, and a lot of property managers, you're not there all the time. You really have no idea who's in your unit at any given time. And that's one of the suggestions I always make to landlords is if you have a single family home, make friends with the neighbors. right? Introduce yourself to the neighbors around your rental unit. Let them know who you are. Give them your phone number and your contact info, and say, hey, would you give me a call if you see 5 pit bulls in the backyard? If they're disturbing your quiet enjoyment, if you're seeing, really all the things that we are concerned about, right?
Yeah.
If they're disturbing you, if they're not being good neighbors, I want to know about it. And so to me, that's a good relationship to foster. You want to be good friends with Mrs. Kravitz, your nosy
Yeah, and it
neighbor.
makes the neighbors feel better about living next to a rental, because sometimes rentals get bad raps and they shouldn't, especially if you're a good landlord and you have good tenants. But yeah, definitely makes the neighbors feel better about the whole thing. So we were going round and round about Senate Bill 278 also before the break. Rental assistance. There's talk of Governor Brown doing something else. I just saw some stuff on Twitter.
Calling a special session to, and I think we're gonna find out more in today's legislative session. There's a housing committee meeting at 2:30. You
Uh-huh.
can look that up on the OLIS site, the Oregon Legislative Information System site. I'm gonna be watching that to see kind of what happens. I was part of the other one. I watched the other legislative session, and that was more of a roundtable with tenant advocates, just telling legislators we're in trouble, right? 60 days isn't enough. And so we'll see what comes today. I think today they're going to have a more targeted message about what they want to see happen. And it may happen. I tell people, like, I've given up all confidence in my ability to predict the future since COVID hit.
I know.
I could never have imagined that all of these things could happen, right? So, get your magic 8-ball out and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. So speaking of the COVID and side effects, the labor shortage, the inflation that we're experiencing, the supply chain problem, how do you see that playing into rent prices? I know we can only go so high in the rent prices, but it sure seems like the landlords are raising their rents every year now pretty systematically. So I'm worried about the long-term viability of our tenants to pay.
I do too. Rents are rising faster than wages. For example, I've taken my income criteria down from 3 times the monthly rent to 2.5 times the monthly rent.
Really? When did you do that?
Just this last year, because it's just, it's challenging, right? Rents are rising faster than wages. I don't know when things are going to slow down. What I can tell you is that a lot of the reason for the dramatic or annual increases you're seeing now are a direct result of the passage of Senate Bill 608, which put a rent cap in place. For landlords who had kept their rents artificially low for years, those are the landlords, the ones who are trying to be nice to their tenants, those are the ones that are suffering the most. They have below market rents and can only raise them by the max. So a lot of times what I'm seeing is they're having to do it every year just to try to play catch up here.
Oh, so that's why, that's the direct side effect you're saying.
It is.
Landlords
And then,
trying to play catch up.
I don't ever recommend topping out the market. I call my personal pricing strategy the Costco pricing strategy, a quality product at a quality price, right?
I like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I never want to be the top of the market. I never want to be the bottom of the market.
Mid-range, that's the best.
We want renters who are going to stay and be good neighbors and all of that. And so, I don't want to be that landlord, because actually what you're going to end up is potentially losing money, because you're going to have a lot more turnover.
Yeah.
Right? As soon as they find something else, or they realize I can't afford to keep paying, this much rent. Holy cow, I was talking to a landlord the other day, renting a property in a not very desirable neighborhood of Eugene. He has remodeled it. It's very lovely, 2-bedroom, 1 bath. And the man is asking $1,700 a month for that unit.
Oh,
and I'm like, holy
Tina.
cow.
And is he getting it?
He's got applicants, but so far the applicants are less than quality. So, and I always say you can get that top of the market rent, but for how long?
I had a landlord last night in Medford, 3-bedroom, 1 bath, 2-story, older house, but all redone, like you're talking about. 1,900. He had an application, but he's going to sell it. He's not going to rent it, but he had an application for $1,900 for 1 bathroom. And I said, there's only 1 potty. Yeah. Who's going to give you that kind of money? And he showed me, he goes, I got it right here, but I can't keep it. I got to sell it. Those poor tenants. Oh my gosh. Okay, so sorry I interrupted you with my horror story.
No, no
Okay, so
worries.
rent, inflation and rents and topping out. Let's talk about room rentals because that's kind of getting to be a thing. Is that a thing up
It
there where you guys are?
is. It is. And I'm really glad you brought that up because I was super excited earlier this year. Oregon Rental Housing Association rolled out its new week-to-week tenancy forms. And so for your listeners out there who may be
Oh,
considering renting a room in their home, I recommend doing it on a week-to-week basis.
why? Why a
Week
week
to
to
week,
week?
week-to-week tenancies are excluded from all of the COVID exemptions and moratoria, and week-to-week tenancies are excluded from Senate Bill 608. So you can terminate a week-to-week tenant at any time with a 10-day no-cause notice.
Really?
Yes, and so for especially for landlords renting rooms in their home, you need to keep control over who's in your home. That is a really great way to go. Now, the downside of a week-to-week agreement, and there is a downside, is that you're not allowed to charge any deposits or any fees. So no security deposit. Now, it doesn't mean the tenant isn't responsible for damage that they cause, but you can't charge a security deposit. You
Can you
can't charge
charge a
late.
parking fee?
Nope, no late fees, no parking fees, no fees of any kind can you charge to a
No,
week-to-week tenant.
no fees. So what about guests? Can you say no overnight guests?
Well, I think if you're renting rooms in your home, you can be a little more restrictive there. And I believe, I'm not an attorney, but I believe that week-to-week tenancies would be exempt from the non-tenant guest
Mhm.
rule that we're under, because it has been exempt from every single one of the COVID rules. So it's just something for your listeners to consider, especially if you're looking at renting a room in your home. Or I got a caller last year in 2020. They wanted, and this was after Senate Bill 608 passed, and it was a church, and their pastor was going on a sabbatical for 1 year, possibly two, to go minister in another country. And they're like, we need to make sure the home is available to him when he comes back, the parsonage. So they wanted to rent it out for a year or two. And I said, well, your first year, you're fine, right, to do a month-to-month agreement. And you could just do a 30-day no cause on a month-to-month agreement within the first year. But the second year is where you're going to have a bit of a problem. And so now that we have the week-to-week forms, that's probably what I would have recommended they do, is a
That
week-to-week.
is so interesting. But I'm sitting here thinking, if I was a tenant, I don't know that I'd feel very comfortable on a week to week. That would be kind of scary.
Sure, sure. Because if you don't toe the line, you're out. And it's quick and easy for the most part.
Well, even if you
Um,
do toe the line, am I understanding the week to week tenant secret? Like you can be asked to move at any time for no, is there like a
that's right.
no? Yeah.
Yeah, and we have a no cause notice for that. We have a non-payment of rent notice for that, a notice of termination with cause for that. The timeframes are all different related to that. It's not
Wow.
ideal for every circumstance,
Yeah.
but especially, I've talked to people who've rented rooms in their home and the person went wacky on them and started being awful, but not awful enough to evict, and they were stuck. They were
Ooh.
stuck. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think it's a great idea. It's from ways beyond. Like you probably, I don't know, remember back in the day, that's what my grandparents did. Like my
Mhm.
grandmother, when she was widowed, they called it rooming houses and
Boarding
she
houses, right,
boarding
right.
house
Yeah.
and she cooked for everybody at
Mhm.
night.
Mhm.
And that's just what everybody did. Nobody thought it was weird.
Right, right. Especially when you're renting rooms in your home. I think tenants or residents are going to think it's a little more weird if you're renting a single family home that way. But if you want to retain complete control, that's the way to do it. And
So
then
do
you
you
don't have
have
to,
to live there? Does the owner have to live
no,
there?
mm-mm, mm-mm.
Interesting.
No, read it. It's available in the definitions section of ORS chapter 90, point 100 is where the definitions are.
You are
And
so
just
fun. You know
scroll down.
all those statutes, all those subsections. That's great. That's great. Okay, well, we only have a minute left in this section. We're going to have to take a break soon, but with the last 60 seconds we have of this segment, Tia, what else would you like to say about room rentals, guests, or the rental assistance? Because we're going to go on to some new topics in the next
Yeah,
segment.
well, housing providers just know that you have the right to serve a 10-day notice now. I'm still getting calls from people who are like, my tenant hasn't paid rent since July. And I'm like, where have you been? We've been telling you to serve this notice, right? And just serve the important notice because it forces the renter to apply for rent assistance. And if they get it, you're going to get manna from heaven in the form of rent assistance money, and it's going to cover a lot. So
well, and it's good for them too, because most people
is.
don't feel good about not paying their rent. Most people do want to try to do the right thing. So
Absolutely, I agree with
well, folks, you're listening to The Real Estate Show. I'm Alice Lema, broker John L. Scott here in Southern Oregon. And we're talking to Tia Politi. She's the president of Oregon Rental Housing Association. We're brought to you by John L. Scott, Southern Oregon, the Rogue Valley Association Realtors, and Guy Gile of Mutual Omaha Mortgage. We'll be right back with more great information. Do not touch that dial. Well, welcome back to The Real Estate Show, folks. Alice Lema here, broker John L. Scott, talking with one of my favorite people, Tia Politi. She's the president of the Oregon Rental Housing Association, and she just knows so much about landlord tenancy and property and what to do and what not to do. And there's been so many changes lately, Tia. We just, could talk for hours and hours. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Alice. I enjoy it a lot.
So one of the things that you mentioned during one of the breaks was screening. Were there changes in screening procedures?
There were, of all the changes that came at us during this most recent long legislative session, that was the only real permanent change in law. We had a lot of things we thought were coming at us, but in the end, they had to really narrow their scope. But one of the things that did pass was Senate Bill 291. I'm writing an article about that right now, and it's changed our screening practices, or will change our screening practices. For property managers, for professionals, this isn't going to be much of a change. It's going to be mostly impactful to your private mom and pop landlords who just do their own screening, right? And they're used to the old rules. Well, now we have to disclose our non-discrimination policy in accordance with that. One of probably the biggest change there for someone like me, like I don't charge a screening fee to my applicants. I just absorb that. And currently under the current laws, if I deny someone like that, I don't have to deny them in writing or tell them why, unless I'm basing my denial on a credit report or they request in writing the reasons for the denial. But starting January 1, if I deny a renter or an applicant, regardless of whether I've charged a fee, I'm going to have to deny in writing, and I'm going to have to tell them why. The other big change is there's been some changes to the criminal history screening, right? If a tenant is participating in a diversion program, for example, you can't count that against them.
What do you mean diversion program? Define what that is.
Say they had, multiple DUIs or something, they take the classes or do whatever, and their sentence can be diverted or reduced or eliminated eventually. I'm not real clear on all the different types of those.
So that would be nonviolent, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I would guess, but gosh, you never know. But the biggest change is that that's going to kind of more closely align state law with HUD law or HUD regulations. So back in 2016, HUD passed or issued its memo on landlords' use of criminal records regarding screening of proposed applicants. And that basically said that what HUD found in its studies was that this landlord's use of criminal records in screening for housing was creating a disparate impact on African Americans and Hispanic Americans, because in their studies, they found that our judicial system inherently has some racist components to it. I'm not saying whether I agree with their assessment or not, but people of color are much more likely to be stopped. They're much more likely to be arrested, and they're much more likely to be convicted at higher rates than Caucasians. And that's what their research showed. So in response to that, what they've asked us to do, and kind of what state law asks us to do, is look at the totality of the person, not just say no criminal history, right? Because their research showed that someone with a criminal event in their past, who hasn't committed any future offenses within the last 6 or 7 years, is no more likely to reoffend than someone with no criminal history at all. And so what they're asking you to do is look at, was it an event or a repeated pattern of behavior? Was the person under the influence of drugs and alcohol and now they're clean and sober? Were they in the throes of mental illness and now they're being treated? If landlords kind of want to start wrapping your minds around what you might expect, there's a wonderful publication that the Oregon Law Center has put out, and it's called Moving Forward with a Past. I have a link to it on my website, and it basically kind of guides renters with troublesome histories through how to make what's called a reasonable accommodation of their landlord to discount some portion of that poor history. And then what it's going to require you to do is, typically when we ask a renter, or when a renter discloses they have criminal history, we always say, okay, we need an explanation. Write down your explanation, and provide us with any documentation you can show regarding your rehabilitation, et cetera. So now if a renter or an applicant gives us that information and we deny them, we're going to have to explain why the supporting documentation they provided did not overcome the negative determination. So you're going to have to say why, and that's going to open landlords up to potentially lawsuits.
That's what I was thinking, because we're not lawyers. Landlords are not lawyers.
No. And you might be, especially private landlords might be well served by using a screening service, right? There's two in our state that I think are tops. The first would be Acranet, ACRANET. The second would be National Tenant Network.
And so do those screening companies, are they the ones that have to provide the explanation to the tenant?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. But I know that, whatever their recommendation is, that they know what they're doing. They know how to screen. They know how to assess that supporting documentation. And so you can rely on them to at least kind of guide you properly through the process of assessing. Screening is a risk assessment. You're assessing the risk a person poses.
So I don't know where to start. So somebody has a criminal history and let's say it's a felon, and most humans are in favor of second chances, especially if it was just like an event under stress or some circumstances. But for whatever reason, landlord feels uncomfortable. They come back and they say, you had a felony, and the tenant says, but I told you that on my application. Like, what's going to happen in that scenario, do you think?
And I provided an explanation, and I provided you with proof that I had paid my fines, that my parole officer gave me a good recommendation. I've rented to people with criminal histories as long as they provide me all of that.
Yeah, right? I'm a big fan of second chance people. I really am, but I don't want to get everybody in trouble by doing this process wrong. So
exactly. So you need to be taking classes on screening. I'm going to be writing an article that's going to go out in the Oregon Mental Housing Association newsletter in January. That's going to kind of guide you, to the best of my ability through that issue. But it is an issue, and
so
folks need to stay aware.
Yeah. So are you saying that perhaps you have to rent to them if they provided you an explanation and they disclosed it?
Potentially, it depends. It depends on, is it a pattern of behavior? How recent were the events, right? Was it long ago? Was it committed when they were a juvenile or very young? You just have to take all of the circumstances into consideration when you're making your decision.
It just makes me so nervous, too, because it sounds like the landlord doesn't get to decide now.
Yeah. Well, that's part of what they're.
Well, we don't want discrimination. So I didn't mean to say it that way, because I think everybody should get a fair chance at a house if they want it. I'm not saying that, but this is just making me really nervous.
Well, and there are already restrictions. For example, we're not allowed to discriminate against someone for convictions resulted to possession or use of marijuana, for having a marijuana card. And now the new law basically says that you cannot hold a conviction against someone that is no longer illegal in the state of Oregon. So,
well, that makes sense though, actually, doesn't it?
I agree. Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite examples, I had a fella come and apply to rent from us, and guy was perfect. He had everything, good job, enough money, great rental history, perfect credit. But he had a conviction for assault 4 on his record from about 2.5 years prior. He had a great explanation. The guy came home from lunch one day to find his wife in bed with his best friend, and he beat the snot out of his best friend, right? We're all capable of, I don't consider that man a danger to society at large, just people who have sex with his now ex-wife. And so, the takeaway is you have to consider it in context. What happened? What have they done? The man admitted what he did. He paid his fines. He paid restitution. He moved on. Divorced his wife and booted his best friend out of his life and found a new best friend. So
Yeah. Well, in those circumstances, I like the idea of looking at the person as a whole human. I think that is great. And I know that the state of Oregon has their heart in the right place a lot of the time. It just, when they pass these laws, they don't always think it all the way through. But at least they gave us forms this time. They don't always
Yeah,
do that when they pass
there
these
you go.
laws, right? Well, Tia, I am so grateful for you being on. We'll have you on again. Tia Politi, president of the Oregon Rental Housing Association. Come back again soon. Have a beautiful Southern Oregon weekend, folks. Bye now.